Just want to go back and get a bit of your history. So where did you grow up?
I'm from the Midlands, just outside of Birmingham, little city called Lichfield. But it is very much a small city. I just normal childhood, very nice. No knives, no crime, no gangs, none of that for me. I'm not like most of UK MMA. And just I was just competing in loads of sports, especially judo. And when I got to, I want to say 17, I was I'd seen some things. One of my best mate had introduced me to MMA. We'd watched some, I think we'd been watching that when I was a little bit younger, and I found a local competition, and I just went along and had my first fight. We kind of just rocked up on the day and just started competing without any MMA training. Just like I was a decent level competitor in judo, but it was just seemed like a fun thing to do. Bit more of a different time.
Yeah. But before we get into your beginning in MMA, like I'm really interested in your judo background, because you don't really hear a lot of that when you're talking to MMA fighters. You know, usually it's like, oh, I tried a bit of jiu-jitsu, tried a bit of Muay Thai, I was boxing, kickboxing, and I moved into MMA. What got you involved with judo at first?
So with the judo, I started when I was, I think, 4 or 5. But my brother had been training, and I'd been, sitting on the side of the mat, absolute little tot. So kind of like every week I'd go and ask, when can I train? When can I train? So like eventually they let me on, and I think I was the youngest on the mat by 2 or 3 years at least. And I did judo in the end for 15 years.
Wow.
And I did it at a pretty good level. I was a few times I won national championships. International competitor at the under 21s, the junior category. Went to Europeans, World Championships in the youth, in the under 21. So like I was a good competitor. My brother ended up being better. I say better than me. He's older than me. He went to the Olympics 2012.
Wow.
He's a high level competitor, but I was decent for as long as I did it. Maybe I could have been all right, but I kind of found a new path halfway through.
Yeah. And like what was it? Was that like national teams, or was there like a club that you competed for? What?
Yeah, so I was with Hardy Spicer's 83 Judo Club.
Okay.
That's with Fitzroy Davies, who's quite a famous coach in the UK community.
Yeah.
People know who he is. Famous is the wrong word for judo. And it was with the national GB, and but my team, Hardy Spices, it was a very small team. It was one of those things where you turn up and there's 8 people in a room, 10 people in a room, and everybody there is an international competitor or a very high level competitor. It was a very like deep room for how few people were there.
Yeah.
And Fitz is an amazing coach. He's produced multiple Olympians, world medalist, European medalist. He's an extremely high level coach. But judo is kind of one of those sports where people are labelled away in obscurity.
Yeah. When you mentioned like you started watching MMA before you and that's what got you into it and training, competing early on, as you said. What was like your first exposure? What was you watching? I'm always interested in what people like. Was it like UFC, Pride?
Yeah, so the first, I forget which of the first fight was, because we had a couple of DVDs when we were on holiday. I watched Vitor Belfort versus Marvin Eastman, where he knees him in the head and puts that huge cut on his head, and Chuck Liddell and Vernon Tiger White was a big knockout. And I believe there was a Randy Couture fight in there as well. But they were the two I remember, the Vitor and Marvin Eastman and Chuck Liddell. And then we watched some of the Randy Couture fights with Chuck, and I kind of watched this and I was like, oh, this Randy guy's a wrestler and Chuck's meant to be a wrestler. Wrestling's very similar to judo. Yeah. I was like, this is pretty cool.
And like around it, and this is still when you're in like your hometown. You're not in London at this point.
No. Yeah, long before that. I was 16 at the time. 16. Still at school. And back then, cage fighting was, you know, criminals and people who wanted to be criminals, basically. No, it was a good community. And I, like I said, I had at least half a dozen fights before I even started training.
Wow.
And some random little events around the UK, you know, you kind of, and eventually someone knocked me on my ass. And the competitive spirit of me was like, I don't want that to happen again. So I found an old gym, a gym called Team Supreme.
Okay.
Which is where Paul Relentless Taylor, old UFC fighter was.
Yeah.
And a guy called Vaughan Harvey, who then went on to be Vaughan Lee, UFC fighter, Eugene Fadiora, Nick Fadiora. There's a bunch of guys who went on to be people. And like, there's you know, there's so many guys from that gym who've either they now run their own gyms or they've gone on to do this, to do this. It's quite an interesting little spot. But I went down there and then trained down there. Had my first I call it my first semi-pro fight. It was not my first. Like I said, I'd had a bunch of my first fight where I'd actually been training.
Yeah.
But they made me wait like 12 months, 18 months before I competed. And by the time I was competing, I was a reasonably good grappler with good takedowns, good throws, good clinch work, and I just blew the guy out. And from there, it kind of, the ball started to roll a little bit more.